Welcome to Crash Course Apologetics, where I summarize the work of Christian scholars in animated videos and interviews. Today we're going to be commenting on a video produced by the channel Crash Course titled Intelligent Design. The link is in the description below. I'd really encourage you to go and watch that video first so that you hear the full context of their critique of intelligent design, and then come and listen to this commentary on that video. I'm joined by Dr. Ted Poston. Dr. Poston, can you briefly give us a sense of your background in philosophy and any work that you've done on the topic of design arguments and intelligent design?
Sure, I'm happy to. I am a professor of philosophy and director of the McCullough Pre-Medical Scholars Institute at the University of Alabama. I got my start in philosophy working on issues in epistemology and philosophy of religion. My interests lie in modeling, understanding rational belief, and how rational belief ought to change in light of the evidence. So in my graduate career, one of my highlights was working with Richard Swinburne. He visited St. Louis University for a semester. And through that experience, I wrote a paper called A Bayesian Defense of the Finetuning Argument that I presented at a later conference where Richard was one of the commentators. I worked on teleological arguments throughout my graduate career, and together with a close friend of mine during my graduate career, we published a paper called A User's Guide to Design Arguments, and it was published in Religious Studies. I've also continued to work in philosophy of religion. Through my experience in working with Richard Swinburne, I became really interested in probabilistic reasoning and the way you can use probabilistic reasoning to model cumulative case arguments. And so I hope in a few years to finish a manuscript on probabilistic approach to thinking about the evidence for theism. So on a completely different front, during this pandemic, I've been putting videos up on YouTube on ancient philosophy. And so I hope by the time that my career is over, which is hopefully many years in the future, is to have a complete set of videos working through the history of philosophy.
That would be incredible. So for those of you that are watching, please check out Dr. Poston's YouTube channel. I've put the link in the description below. Watch this video first and then go enjoy his channel. There's a lot of great stuff there, great content. So the way this will work is we're going to play one clip at a time from the original Crash Course video on intelligent design. And after each clip, I'm going to have Dr. Poston comment on what was said. Again, to get the full context, please go and watch the original video. I've put the link in the description. But I'm assuming that you've done that, and now you would like to hear the comments of a professional philosopher that's done work in this area on that video. So let's go ahead and start the first clip.
Over the centuries, the effort to craft a perfect, bulletproof argument for the existence of God has taken many forms.
So the goal of a perfect, bulletproof argument is quixotic. It's exceedingly unrealistic to believe that there are perfect, bulletproof arguments for anything of substantial interest. Consider solipsism, the belief that you are the only person in existence. If one requires a perfect, bulletproof argument that solipsism is false, in order to be rational in believing that there are other people, then one's likely to go through life trapped in one's own thoughts. A more realistic goal for arguments is that the premises should be reasonable and rationally increase one's confidence in the conclusion. When that's the goal, it's much more difficult to erect a straw man and tear it down. There are lots of arguments for the existence of God that proceed from premises that are reasonable and rationally ought to increase one's confidence in the conclusion. I should add at the outset a quick remark about intelligent design. So when one talks about intelligent design, that is often code for a rejection of Darwinian evolution and correspondingly an acceptance of creationism, where that's understood in a very particular manner. This is often joined with a political agenda to change science education in public schools. Now, my view is that every plausible contemporary design argument proceeds on the view that molecular genetics provides a mechanism for the transmission of information that explains a lot of biological features. In short, this is to say that contemporary design arguments are much more plausible than you find in public conversation.
Okay, so the next clip that we'll play, it comes later in the video, but it fits the kind of logical flow, which is what we're going for here. So he'll mention Richard Swinburne, and I'm really grateful that we have you because you've studied under Swinburne, done work with Swinburne. So let's look at this clip.
Contemporary British philosopher Richard Swinburne gives us a modern teleological argument with a twist of probability. He says that even if there's another possible explanation for the universe, we should go with the explanation that's most likely to be true. And he says that it's simply more probable that God designed the world than that it came about through the pure chance of evolutionary processes.
So this describes Swinburne's approach to arguments in general. One ought to reason to the best explanation of the available evidence, provided that the hypothesis itself is plausible. The key claim in Swinburne's design argument is that the available evidence is more probable given that God exists than given that the universe arose purely by chance. Swinburne considers relevant evidence to be that, first, the universe is characterized by laws with specific parameters, and that, two, the universe began in an initial state and has a certain rate of expansion. It is an incredibly surprising fact that very small changes to the parameters and the laws. So, for instance, the relative strength of the strong nuclear force. The strong nuclear force binds together protons in the nucleus of an atom. If that force varies, then the formation of carbon and oxygen within stars is no longer possible. And then molecular chemistry is going to be a very boring science. You're not going to have carbon and you're not going to have life. So similarly, the rate of expansion of the universe falls within a very narrow range that allows for star formation and hence interesting chemistry and hence life. So the consensus view among philosophers is that if there's just a single universe, then it's incredibly unlikely that these facts would obtain. And it's much more likely that if there were a God, that a universe would have conditions to permit the development of life. It can be shown that given some modest assumptions, this provides evidence for theism. So if you're interested in those modest assumptions, I would point you to Swinburne's book, the first book that he wrote in 1973, An Introduction to Confirmation Theory, or his more accessible The Existence of God, and his initial chapters there, chapters 1 through 4.
Very good. All right, so let's look at this next clip where Hank Green brings up fine-tuning arguments.
Likewise, another class of modern defenses of the teleological argument are collectively known as fine-tuning arguments. These arguments accept the Big Bang and evolution as scientific truths, but they maintain that for the evolution of life to occur, it's most likely that God set up the precise conditions that it required, rather than them coming about by accident.
So suppose you want to bake a cake. It's your spouse's birthday, and you want to surprise her with a cream cheese frosting double layer carrot cake.
Oh, you had me until carrot.
Oh, I love carrot cake. How will you go about it? You'll make a plan and you'll follow the instructions. At least if you're like me and you can't cook on instinct alone. It's crucial for design arguments that we discuss the nature of God. God is the most complete, perfect being there could be. God is the being that is maximally good, intelligent, and powerful. God acts for reasons in a similar fashion that persons act for reasons. For God, those reasons come from the good. And so if one can identify good features, then one can know that God has reason to bring about those features. This is a step in the design argument that's crucial, but it's not often discussed. To the extent that the development of complex carbon-based intelligent life is a great good, then we have reason to think that God, if he exists, would bring that about. So we can see from another angle here that in contrast to a purely chance explanation for the incredibly surprising features of the universe, the hypothesis that there is a maximally good, maximally intelligent, and maximally powerful being makes it somewhat likely that there would be complex carbon-based intelligent life.
All right, let's go ahead and discuss this next clip.
Objectors will counter by saying that the problem with these arguments is you can't really make a probability claim when you only have a sample set of one. If we had multiple Earths that we could examine, we could see how likely any particular adaptation is or how unique the conditions for life are. Then we would know if it were likely or unlikely to happen without God. But we can't know that, at least not now, because we can only access this one world where we know that things evolved as they did.
So the first comment I want to make is that the actual argument that he gives isn't at all a plausible version of the fine-tuning argument. The fine-tuning argument is focused on general laws and conditions of the universe. So he does mention the alleged problem with single-case probabilities. This is a problem that if an event happens just once, then you can't determine its probability. So let's think about that. Suppose we have a small cube of an unknown origin. It has 6 faces with marks on each side. We toss it on the ground and it lands with this mark that looks like a star up. And then the cube is just destroyed. I mean, when we tossed it on the ground, we saw the star came up and then just went up in a puff of smoke. Since this is a unique cube and it was tossed only once, the objection from single case probabilities would be that we can't determine the probability that the star mark lands up. But we can reason in general about the geometrical properties of a cube and the distribution of its weight to determine the probability that any particular mark will land up. Perhaps that just gives us a range of probabilities, but it still gives us information. In a similar fashion, we can reason about what we know about the properties of, for example, the strong nuclear force to determine the probability that the force of the strong force would take on its particular value. The worry about single case probabilities arises only if you know absolutely nothing about the relevant event. But given contemporary physics, we know a lot about the fundamental forces, and so we can reason about the probabilities that we would see the forces taking the values that they currently have.
Okay, so now we're going to look at the next clip where William Paley is brought into the discussion. So let's play that now.
Paley saw teleology in the world and assumed from that God's existence. He continued his analogy by comparing a watch to a living organism. Look at the complexity of the human body. Heart and lungs working together, producing sweat to keep ourselves from overheating, transforming food into energy. We're just generally amazing all around. Look at how elements of the natural world operate according to complex laws that sustain a beautiful natural harmony. Paley said that this couldn't possibly just have happened any more than the design of a pocket watch could just have happened. There must be a designer.
So let's just begin with the recognition that Paley isn't the only one who saw teleology in the world. No less an authority than Aristotle, writing around 330 BC, held that the natural world couldn't be understood apart from a creative force that aimed for certain ends. Aristotle rejected a chance explanation of complex biological features because he thought that matter couldn't organize itself into repeatable complex structures. Of course, Aristotle thought that there wasn't an intelligent designer, but rather that design was inherent in nature via the activity of metaphysically basic forms. This is just to say that people have seen design in nature for thousands and thousands of years. So the crucial question here is, what is the best explanation of design in nature? Darwin offers a theory according to which design is explained in terms of properties of matter that encode design instructions that are passed on. Sometimes they randomly change, but they're preserved from generation to generation. Does random mutation of biological information adequately explain all the relevant biological facts? You don't need to rely on analogy to think that the answer to this question is no. There's a large literature on this, but some scholars cite features like the time scale it would take a random process to develop complex life is just far too longer than the time permitted by the standard evolutionary story. Or other scholars cite the existence of biological features that are irreducibly complex. Whichever fact you take, it raises some questions about the standard evolutionary story that require an answer.
Interesting. All right, let's look at this next clip.
Next objection, some parts of nature seem to be without purpose. A blind spot obviously doesn't have any function, and neither do nipples on a man. Paley's response here was, just because you don't know there's a purpose doesn't mean there isn't one. But this is a problem too, because his whole argument for believing in God is that you should look at the world and see purpose. So if we see some things in the world that are working great and really seem to have complexity and definite use, and others that don't, that's a flaw in his argument. What's more, the absence of any obvious purpose in things can lead people to start searching for purposes, effectively making them up.
So the core issue here is that one can't just pick and choose features to find those that confirm one's theory and then redescribe those that appear to disconfirm one's theory. That's just fallacious reasoning. To the extent defenders of intelligent design do that, then shame on them. I think it's important to the broader public to know that academic researchers are often dismayed as to what is presented in the public as a fair sample of research on these issues. But it's equally important to note that this kind of fallacious reasoning is found in some contemporary Darwinian accounts of biological features that are irreducibly complex. So when faced with these features, the strategy is to search for other purposes for those features, and then claim that, oh, well, that's just so. We would just so see these complex features were they to serve this other purpose. That's just to say that this is a very tempting kind of fallacious reasoning that people need to be on guard against. It's just incorrect to think that broad, substantive theories don't have empirical problems. In the end, one accepts a broad, substantive theory because one judges that it has less problems than competing theories. But that's a complex and a rather subtle judgment. Obviously, rhetorical tricks are more persuasive than robust reasoning about the relevant evidence. So my hope is that the videos like these bring more people into a reasonable debate on the big issues of the day.
So we've got one more clip to look at, and then I'll get your kind of final comments. So let's play it now.
Rather than searching for disanalogies, another way Paley's argument has been countered is with an alternative explanation for condition B. Paley says that bodies are purposeful, and from there concludes that the purpose had to have been put there by an intelligent creator. But another explanation for how bodies came to have the complexity and functionality they have today is natural selection and random mutation. We can concede that the existence of a designer god helped make sense of the origins of the world in a pre-scientific age, but now we have a perfectly good scientific explanation for how the complexity of the world came about. So who needs a watchmaker when you have evolution by natural selection?
So I hope it's clear now from what we've been discussing that the alternative Darwinian story isn't a perfectly good explanation. Remember, we began with a discussion of whether there are any perfect bulletproof arguments for God's existence. If perfect bulletproof arguments are the standard, then not even the Darwinian story counts as a argument. So the standard is one of plausibility. Determine plausibility in terms of overall explanatory merits of the rival views and give more credence to the view that's the best explanation. So that's a really labor-intensive effort. We have to read multiple books, talk to people on all sides of the debate, craft reading skills, and so on. It takes a long time to craft good judgment in this case. One thing worth noting here is that the evidential case for God doesn't rise or fall according to the plausibility of the Darwinian account. We began discussing the cosmic fine-tuning argument, according to which there are features of the universe that appear to be fine-tuned for the development of life. Suppose, as Augustine thought back in the 4th century AD, that the universe is like an egg set up for the development of life. Then a story can be told about the development of life in accord with natural laws. But far from disconfirming the existence of God, this Augustinian self-organization model provides significant confirmation for theism. But note that in that case, the Darwinian story is completely and entirely true.
That's a really important point.
So the upshot is that people should just chill out and aim to give a fair and balanced evaluation of the evidence. There's far less at stake in some of these debates than I think people realize. After all, if this self-organization scenario is true, you're going to be having biologists across the world just celebrating. But they're going to be celebrating for lots of reasons that they can offer a biological explanation for complex flora and fauna. But then the physicists are going to be going, oh my gosh, we have an incredible explanatory task to fulfill, because we have to explain why the universe has laws that enable the development of life like this. I don't see these debates going away anytime soon. I think there are lots of questions. There's lots of relevant evidence here to sort. There are good people on both sides of the debate. I hope that people begin more reasonable conversations about these issues.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Poston, for commenting on the video. For those watching, I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please consider clicking the subscribe button, and also sit tight, because the next video in the playlist is coming up. That video will be on the topic of what is God like, and I'll be joined by Dr. Ryan Mullins. Thanks. See you soon.